Okay, so we heard about Mobilise first in a staff meeting, didn't we?
We did.
Oh, yeah. And there were 4 people chosen, which was yourself, another Key Stage 2 teaching assistant, a Key Stage 1-to-1 teaching assistant, and a 1-to-1 teaching assistant from Key Stage 1. That was the 4 people that were chosen to do the observations. And then you had a meeting, didn't you, with the
Yeah, we met
4?
with the deputy head and the higher level TA. We agreed who would observe who. We decided not to observe our people we worked with in the same key stage to get a neutral angle on the observations, and we didn't tell the TAs that we were going to observe them. We dropped in as a surprise, didn't we?
Yeah, so I knew the observations. I knew this was going on within the school. I felt quite happy and confident that in myself that I knew that was going to happen. I didn't feel nervous about it. It was nice knowing that I was going to be observed by my equals, my peers, as opposed to somebody from senior management, for example. It certainly made me feel more relaxed. So one day, probably a week or so after I found out it wasn't yourself who observed me. 2 of the other part of the team came and observed me during a numeracy lesson. I knew that they were going to, part of it was writing down. You had to write down what we were doing every minute?
Every 2 minutes.
Every 2 minutes.
2-minute observations.
So it was nice knowing that because, and then when they were sat watching me, obviously they were writing a lot. If I hadn't been aware that they were noting what I was doing every 2 minutes, I think I would have been thinking, crikey, what are you writing all the time? So I think they observed me for about 20 minutes during a lesson.
We didn't come up against much opposition. There was a couple of TAs who didn't like it being observed by their peers. They felt that it wasn't our position to be judging them, but they didn't voice their opinions until after, because it was a surprise drop-in session. They weren't prepared that we were going in on them days. So the observations had already taken place, even though they didn't like it. But then they allowed us to use the information gathered to pass on.
And Mel, can you tell me about some of the key themes that came out of your observations, some of the things you saw and took away from them?
It was interesting to see, because the teachers had all been told about the Mobilise thing, that some of them had already taken it on board, had looked at their own teaching methods and how they communicate with the TAs, and it came through quite clear, those that were going to accept it. We also found that some of the staff tried it and didn't particularly get on with it, or it didn't work for them, and we also came up against a few that it's never been a natural thing for them to do, so it didn't work.
Okay, so I think Mobilise has made me probably more aware of how I act in the classroom and the way I interact with the children. I don't think it's made a huge difference to what I actually do in the classroom. I mainly work with a lower attaining set, but I've always moved around the classroom and worked with different children, because if you work with a child for too long, they can become too dependent on you. And sometimes it depends what you're doing in the classroom. They don't always need you either, do they?
No.
Depending on what you're doing on that particular day. So personally, for myself, I don't think it hasn't made a huge difference to how I work within a classroom. It's made me think about what I do a bit more aware of what I'm doing and why I'm doing it, I suppose, and what impact that has on the child's learning.
I felt that I had a big problem about finishing a project, an activity with each child, and Mobilise has made you see that you don't have to have that end product as long as they've learnt something in the middle, and the staff I'm working with are more aware of that themselves from this. Instead of feeling, as a TA, my table haven't completed that, it's all right for that to happen now. And in Key Stage 1, there was a lot of, you were working with the lower ability children a lot more frequent than you were the highers. Now there does seem to be a few of the staff have taken that on board, and we probably have the rest of the class while they're then spending more time with the lower abilities. So it has come through.
Yeah, it has.
To
And
some
it's
of the
nicer
staff.
as a teaching assistant not also to work with lower ability children, you know, the lowest attaining children all the time. Because if you're, I don't know how you found it, Mel, but if you're working with those children all the time, in the end you do, you know, they're not probably making the progress you want. It can be quite demoralising as working as a teaching assistant, constantly working with those children. And they're probably also fed up with working with us.
Yeah.
So now I do think teachers are now more come and work with that set and let us move, you know, to the
Definitely.
ones with a little bit more ability, which just as a teaching assistant definitely makes your job more rewarding, doesn't it?
Yeah, absolutely.
Doing that.